Chapter 1. Sarah clutched the bottle of red she'd brought. She could see Mike's hand clamped too tightly around the homegrown flowers he would offer their hostess, Bev. These rituals mattered. Familiar things helped keep everyday life stitched together. It was almost easy to pretend the world hadn't unraveled at all. Almost. These days, it was a rare treat to share a meal with friends. Even dinner came with a risk assessment. You had to trust they'd tested, and that no one in their house was carrying germs that could disable or kill you. Bev's husband, Steve, was immunocompromised, so Sarah knew her old friend would be more careful than most. She'd also said there'd be air filtration units, although Sarah could see no sign of them from where she sat at the dining room table. Maybe they were built in. In the meantime, it felt almost surreal to sit in a warm room with other people, the kind of situation they'd normally go out of their way to avoid. It was so nice. Her shoulders eased and dropped a little. She could feel a smile stretching unaccustomed muscles across her face. Candlelight flickered, casting warm reflections in the wine glasses and off the silver cutlery laid out with Bev's customary precision. The aroma of homemade moussaka wafted through the air. Laughter and chatter filled the room. The Christmas decorations seemed almost out of place in a world that had lost much of its cheer, but here they were, a splash of colour against the greyness outside. Sarah and Bev had known each other for a long time. They'd met on the first day of a sign language evening course at the local college. Sarah had always been enthusiastic about learning languages of all kinds, and Bev's new partner was fluent in sign. Sarah was sure they'd both picked up this new language so quickly because they'd forbidden each other to speak when they got together. They had to do all their chatting in sign, and they always had a lot to say. In those days, no one could have dreamed that life would become what it was now. A seemingly endless series of warnings and fear in an effort simply to stay alive. She still couldn't keep herself from checking, though, as she glanced around the room, taking mental snapshots, not just of the guests, but of the airflow, the windows, the exit. These days, vigilance had become instinctive. Every enclosed space held potential threat. Sarah's eyes met Mike's across the table. She smiled at him. She was glad it had been his turn to accompany her on an outing. No one in their group was allowed to go anywhere alone. It wasn't safe. That was the rule for any expeditions the group knew about. Sarah didn't advertise all her outings, because some of them she had to make alone. Some of them would be made more dangerous if she had company. No one knew the number of times she was out and about on her own. But this had been one of those times when company was definitely required, and Mike was a good companion for social occasions, never at a loss for an answer, always ready with a quip to lighten the mood. But now it registered on her that his features, usually open and easy to read, were scrunched up, his forehead creased into a frown. Slowly, to avoid comment, he inclined his head to the side, prompting Sarah to turn her attention in the same direction. As she did so, the merriment in the room was abruptly punctuated by a fit of coughing from Donald. He was a neighbour of Bev's and had been introduced to them as the world's best babysitter. He'd smiled and said what a pleasure it always was to take care of Bev's child. At this moment, though, he was hunched over his napkin, his body jerking with each violent expulsion of breath. His rasping cough seemed to grind into the walls. Sarah gripped her wineglass too hard. She tried to loosen her fingers, but the lightness she'd felt mere moments ago was gone, replaced by a tightening in her gut that mirrored Donald's spasms. "Oh dear," Bev said. She rose from her chair. "Donald, are you all right?" Sarah noticed the split-second glance Bev sent her way, and her suspicions, already roiling, rose even higher. Donald waved his hostess off with one hand while still clutching his napkin with the other. "Just went down the wrong way," he mumbled, trying to catch his breath between coughs. But his face was pale, and beads of sweat clung to his forehead. The woman who'd been sitting the other side of him, Flora, surreptitiously tried to move her chair away. Pat, another of Bev's neighbours, threw a contemptuous look Flora's way and moved into Donald's space to offer him a sip of water. Sarah glanced back at Mike. His expression clearly mirrored her own concern. They'd seen this play out before, knew too well how quickly things could turn sour. Sarah's scalp clenched, and once again, she found herself having that stupid argument with herself about how far one went with politeness when it might mean disablement or death. She already knew the answer to that one, having had the argument with herself too often. "Did you test for VF before you came here tonight?" she asked. And as she could have predicted, the room fell silent, as if she'd committed the worst faux pas known to humankind. Donald glared at her, and when able to catch his breath between hacking coughs, demanded, "Why the fuck would I do that? It's just a cold." Mike was already out of his seat, fishing for a mask in his pocket. Sarah already had hers on. As they left the room, Bev yelled after them, "And don't bother coming back." "No worries about that," Sarah retorted, shutting the door behind her and wishing she could simply go home, curl up and cry, and then go to sleep and wake up to a world that had gone back to normal. But this was the new normal now, and she had to keep her big girl pants on and simply get on with it. Sarah couldn't stop herself playing the moment back in her mind. Donald's hunched shoulders, the sweat on his face, his convulsive cough. She should have walked out sooner. She should have said no. She should never have gone. A week later, Donald was dead. Steve, Bev's husband, was in ICU. Flora, another member of the dinner party, was apparently unable to get out of her bed and had to be spoon-fed. Luckily for her, she had a large family of willing volunteers. As for poor old Pat, who was known for her good temper and smiley disposition, she now suffered with insomnia, poor memory, dark mood, anguished fear. Sarah felt horribly guilty that she'd taken such a risk with her group's health. She could have brought it back to everyone with unthinkably horrendous repercussions. On reaching home, she and Mike had gone straight into isolation, and no one in their house had come to harm. Sarah felt extraordinarily lucky. Despite the others' protestations that it wasn't her fault, she felt dreadful for having insisted her old friend Bev was trustworthy. She had assured the group that Bev would be totally honest about testing and mitigations. Sarah would never trust anyone ever again. It was the only way to stay alive in this hellish new world where most people thought it was just fine to infect others with God knows what and not give it another thought. They probably didn't care because after infecting someone, they would simply go about their own everyday lives and never know they'd killed or disabled them. The light from Bruce's screen spilled faintly down the hallway as Sarah padded to the kitchen for water, catching a glimpse of him hunched over the desk again, clicking through yet more articles. It was always more bad news, never less. She didn't need to see the headlines to know the shape of it. The house was quiet, like always these days. Too quiet. No one moved unless they had to, and every movement sounded like something breaking. It had been a couple of weeks since that dinner. That stupid, stupid dinner. Her stomach still clenched when she thought about it. How she'd wanted so badly to believe Bev, how she'd ignored the unease. Half the people who'd been there were already dead or close enough. It sat in her chest like a pile of festering trash. She leaned against the doorframe now, watching Bruce as he stilled, his face dragged down by an unutterably weary expression. He shoved his chair back from the desk. Even standing, there was something about his posture that put her even more on the alert. "Listen up," he said, loud enough to echo around the house. Sarah heard people's footsteps in response, converging on the kitchen. Nadine was already there, at the table, tea untouched in her hands, staring at her husband with open dread as the others filtered in. Sarah stayed in the doorway. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear this, not really. "There's a new variant in China," Bruce said flatly. Of course there was a new variant. There was always a new variant. Sarah stifled her sigh, afraid it would come out as a groan. "Hospitals are collapsing," Bruce continued. "Funeral homes can't cope. They are burning bodies in the streets." There was a pause, not of surprise or fear, that was long gone, but the grim stillness of people absorbing a blow they'd expected and had no idea how to dodge. It was resignation verging on despair. "If previous waves are anything to go by," he added, "it'll be here in a few weeks." Sarah glanced at Nadine as she moved to Bruce's side, placing her hand on his shoulder, as if touching him could anchor them to safety. "We'll keep doing what we always do to stay safe," Nadine said. Bruce murmured something into her hair. Sarah looked away, giving them that sliver of privacy. Then he said loudly, "Indeed, we will. We'll do what we always do." And that was that. No question. Sarah had crossed her arms tightly, holding herself together. She could feel Flannel's warm weight on her foot, her dog grounding her as if he knew she needed it. "It's like we're hapless characters in some twisted dystopian novel," she said aloud before she'd thought it through. A chuckle escaped someone. It was devoid of mirth, but yet sufficient to collapse the oppressive atmosphere that had captured them for a moment. She straightened a little. "We'll increase precautions. Go over the supplies again. Add to the stash. Reinforce our entry protocols. Keep ourselves to ourselves." The others murmured agreement. There was little else they could do but fortify what control they had over their small corner of an increasingly chaotic world. "We'll take it one day at a time," Nadine said again with quiet conviction, as if saying it enough times would work the charm. The room emptied out. One by one, they slipped back to their corners of the house, the silence creeping back in behind them. Sarah stood there a moment longer, hand resting on Flannel's head, staring after Bruce and Nadine as they made their way back towards the dim light emanating from their room, where Bruce's screen still glowed. The weight of what had already happened pressed against what was coming. One day at a time. Fine. But she was done trusting anyone outside these walls. Absolutely done. Sarah blinked away the tears that came when she was told of Sam's plight. She did briefly think of her call to keep ourselves to ourselves, but April and Sam were longtime members of their community, and they knew all the rules. They'd been old friends long before the VF arrived. It was just that they didn't live in the big communal house with Sarah. There had been no room when the time came for people to close into their own little enclaves. She'd received April's call an hour ago, but it had taken that long to get to Sam and April's flat, even though it would have been a mere 10-minute walk in pre-VF times. There was no such thing as being able to walk down a street now. All precautions had to be taken if she wished to get to her destination in one piece. April had tried to stop her from coming at all. She hadn't wanted Sarah to take the risk, but she had wanted her to know what the Dockstown freeloaders were up to now. "Please don't worry," Sarah assured April. "I'm used to getting about with no one being any the wiser. It's much quicker for me. Just don't tell anyone in the group, because I am breaking the rules by coming alone." The candle between them cast wavering shadows over the walls. From the scent, Sarah knew April had found the box of lavender ones from their foraging trip. Nice and calming. She tried not to think about what they'd do when those ran out too. Sam went along to pick up his usual tablets and was told there were none available, April said, her voice steady despite the worry on her face. Sarah shifted forward, frowning. "His usual tablets?" April nodded. "They're for epilepsy. He suffered from seizures since the industrial accident a few years ago." "The industrial accident," Sarah repeated, the phrase hanging in the air like a bad omen. "He went to work for Dockstown Freedom when they first set up the Freeport to boost trade during the initial pandemic. But then there was the accident. Of course, since then, and the onset of fits, they won't give him work, and they didn't pay any compensation." April's voice wavered a little. "The more pressing difficulty has been not being able to get the meds." She shrugged, an oddly casual gesture given the gravity of her statement. "You didn't tell me," Sarah said, concerned to see the telltale signs of strain around April's eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for her cup. "I didn't want to add to your worries," her friend said simply. Sarah clasped her hand, and they sat in silence for a moment, letting the truth of Sam's situation sink in. The shortage of medication wasn't new, it was just another blow in an endless barrage. But epilepsy medication, that was life or death. Sarah thought of Sam, a good bloke with a laugh like a warm hug, felled by his own body without warning, and now by the system that should have protected him. "Do you know what you are going to do?" Sarah asked finally. April exhaled slowly. "We're scraping by on what we have left. Cutting pills in half, trying to stretch them out as long as we can, but that's obviously not working very well or he wouldn't have had this fit. And after that, if the Dockstown pill peddlers can't get any more, or rather, won't let you have any more, What then? April looked at Sarah, her eyes searching for an answer neither of them had. I don't know, she admitted. Pray for a miracle? It was the helplessness that Sarah hated so much, the feeling that there was absolutely nothing she could do to make things better. I take it you've tried other pharmacies? April nodded. We've called every one within walking distance, and then some that aren't. There must be something, Sarah muttered. You wouldn't happen to have a secret stash of anti-epileptics up your sleeve? April asked half-heartedly, trying to smile. Sarah couldn't emulate the brave attempt to lighten the mood. She'd thought of something, or rather, someone. She tapped her finger against her chin and murmured, There might be another way. April perked up slightly. What do you mean? There's this bloke I know from before Dockstown came into being. Phil. Versatile chap. He used to be a chemist, before everything went pear-shaped. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, as if considering the wisdom of saying these things out loud. He might still have contacts who can get medicine, or at least know where we could find some. April perked up. Can we go and see him now? I think I might even know who you mean, although I haven't seen him for years and years. If it's the same Phil, that is. No, you need to stay with Sam. I don't think it's possible to have an epileptic seizure 1 minute and then be fine the next, is it? I mean, that's not how it works, right? April scowled. No, you're right. He'll be groggy and disoriented. We can't chance him coming round and finding no one here. Don't worry, I'll go and see Phil now. Pulling up her balaclava, Sarah moved towards the door. She was always dressed in black, anyway. It helped her to remain unseen, but the headgear was extra. She was conscious that she wasn't supposed to do this. But then again, people weren't supposed to be left to have fits alone in a crumbling flat either. At least, everything about this was well away from home and the rest of the group. So, this was entirely on her own head, and no one else's. Well, apart from Phil's, if he agreed to help. She stepped out into the dim hallway, moving quietly, as was her fashion. Now they all lived in a world where being noticed usually meant trouble. Out of the building, she took a deep breath, steeling herself. The chemist shop that Phil used to run was across town, in an area now controlled by the Dockstown freeloaders. She hoped he still lived there. She clung to the shadows, avoiding areas of light cast by the moon. The curfew was in effect, and she had no desire to encounter any Dockstown patrols. As she walked, she turned over in her mind what she would say to Phil. She didn't want to get him in trouble, but she did want him to get her drugs for Sam. This was assuming he was even still at the old shop. It had been months since she'd seen him last. Would he be willing to help? Why should he? The streets grew emptier as Sarah approached her goal. The buildings were barred and shuttered. The pavements cracked and litter-strewn. There appeared to be no one around anywhere. She knew better, though. There was always someone somewhere. And she felt exposed being out at night. Was it quieter than normal? Was the desolation of the streets and hulking buildings more menacing than usual? She lowered her head even further and quickened her pace. Finally, she arrived at Phil's place. The windows were boarded up and a heavy padlock hung from the door. Peering through the gaps in the boards, she searched for any sign of life inside. Had Phil moved on? Most people fled this area as the Dockstown freeloaders took over. And yet, something told her that life still clung within these dilapidated walls. She reached out tentatively, fingers grazing the old, battered padlock. She gave it a gentle tug, and to her surprise, it fell open in her hand. It was almost too convenient. Like a trap waiting to spring, shut the moment she made any further move. She pushed on the door, but it merely creaked. But then came the slight scuffling of footsteps across the floor. Sarah froze as a shadow moved in the depths of the shop. She waited to see what would happen. Bolts slid back so close to her face, she barely stifled a squeak of shock. The door moved a little, and a low voice demanded, "Who is it?" Certain this was Phil, Sarah pulled her balaclava up a bit to show her face. "It's me, Phil. It's Sarah." "Sarah?" More scuffling sounds, and then the door swung soundlessly open. Phil stood in the dim glow of a shrouded lantern. He was thinner than Sarah remembered, his face deeply lined, but a spark of recognition lit his eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Never thought I'd see you here again." He glanced past her into the empty street. Get yourself inside quick now. Sarah slipped past him into the musty interior of the shop. Phil secured the door behind her. What in blazes are you doing out after curfew? He asked. You know they patrol every night now. I know, I'm sorry, Sarah said. I'm certain I wasn't followed, but it's urgent. My friend Sam, he needs medicine for his epilepsy. Phil's brow furrowed. Medicine? Ain't no medicine left around here. Not after the Dockstown mob took over the last clinic and pharmacies. He shook his head. Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it in this ghost town. There must be something, Sarah insisted. Anything. Black market, hidden supplies, I don't care. Phil hesitated. Even if I did know of anything, it'd be risky business to go digging for it now. Sarah stepped closer to him. Please, Phil. Sam's in a really bad way. He had a terrible seizure earlier tonight. We've tried everywhere else. This is his only hope. Phil held her gaze for a long moment. Sarah tried to silently convey the urgency of her plea. Finally, he said, I might know someone who can help, but it's not going to be easy or safe. Since when has anything been either? Sarah countered, trying to smile but aware it had probably been more a showing of teeth. Let me make some calls. I can't promise anything, but maybe I can tap a few old contacts. He turned toward a battered phone sitting on the counter. Thank you, Phil, Sarah said on an outrush of pent-up breath. I owe you for this. He waved a hand. Don't mention it. I always liked Sam. Decent bloke, badly treated. Shame what's happened to this place. His voice trailed off as he started dialing. Sarah tried to rest her legs. They ached from all the walking, but she couldn't remain still, and ended up pacing the creaking floorboards as muffled conversations drifted from the phone. She wandered briefly to the back of the store, peering out through the grimy window. A tangle of overgrown shrubbery pressed against the building, like the wilderness was trying to reclaim it. Ivy curled up drain pipes, and tall grass brushed the glass. No neighbors nearby, no prying eyes. After what seemed a very, very long time, Phil finally put the phone down. Well? Sarah asked expectantly. Phil hesitated before answering. I've had an idea. I used to know of a stash of various medications squirreled away for other uses. It's a long shot, but if we're lucky, there may be something we can use for Sam. Sarah slowly exhaled. Tell me where I can find it. I'll go now and be back before dawn. Phil held up a hand. Not so fast. You won't get far without me along. Let me lock up here and we'll be on our way. Sarah hesitated. She hadn't wanted to involve anyone else, but she realized she had no choice. So she nodded. They were one step closer to getting the meds Sam needed. She just hoped their luck would hold out a little while longer. Because there was no doubt about it, they'd been extraordinarily lucky so far this night. They'd barely gone a dozen paces from the shop when Sarah's foot caught on something soft but solid. She staggered and fell on it, landing hard. It yielded a bit under her weight, but the messages of fabric and flesh being sent to her brain were confusing, until her sight adjusted and revealed a slack jaw, half-open eyes. It was a body. This man was not unconscious. He was dead. She flinched away from him, having already registered that he was still warm. Phil crouched down. Dockstown Patrol, he breathed, nodding to the intricately carved buckle on the man's belt. Slowly, Sarah rose to her feet and stood close to Phil, waiting for his instruction. Back away, he whispered, pressing something into her hand. Involuntarily, she clutched it hard. They're already here. I'll draw them away. You get out the back of the shop, hide in the shrubbery. Wait, I'll join you. And then, somewhere down the alley, metal clinked. Boots hit the ground. Shadows shot towards them. They were out of time.